Welcome to the Smiles Are Wild channel, brought to you by Pediatric Dental Associates and Orthodontics. My name is Amy Morgan. We will be bringing you fun and educational videos weekly to help you take better care of your child's oral health care needs at home and on the go. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to see all of our new videos. And remember, it doesn't really matter how you take care of your teeth as long as you take care of them from the beginning.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Morgan. I'm the marketing coordinator here for Pediatric Dental Associates and Orthodontics. Today we're going to be covering some fun stuff about adoption and kind of how adoption can play into seeing medical professionals, dentists, things like that. I'm joined by a special guest. We'll get her introduced here in a minute, but you want to go ahead and say hi, Alex?
Hello.
Really quickly? Yes, all right. So we're going to cover a few housekeeping items first. Number one is that if you are watching this video and you are watching the replay, please let us know in the comments. Just use hashtag replay. That just lets us know that people are coming back and watching the video. And then also we want to make sure you share this video. We always do a giveaway with our weekly lives. So this week we're going to be giving away a PDAO swag bag, which will include an electric toothbrush. Those electric toothbrushes retail anywhere from $150 to $250. So the value of that package is going to be at least $200 because we're also going to throw in a whole bunch of other PDAO swag. So that'll be super exciting.
Am I eligible to win?
You could, sure, absolutely, always, whatever. So other thing is we want to make sure that you're following us on all of our social media outlets. So you can like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. And then last but not least, we also have a podcast that you can find on iTunes and Spotify. And most of all of those handles can be searched by using Smiles Are Wild, and it's all one word. Okay? So now we have that out of the way, I want to go ahead and introduce our special guest. This is Miss Alex Fitton. She is actually a local mom here to Northwest Arkansas, but she is also the host of the Adoptive Mom Podcast, which you can find on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and other places, I assume, where you can find your podcast.
All places.
So Alex is a friend through a friend of mine, and also I hope it's okay to disclose her children come here, and so we're going to use some of her valuable information that she has from being in the adoptive world to kind of learn a little bit more about that, kind of maybe how some of that is happening here in our area, Northwest Arkansas, but also how even if you're not an adoptive family or know anybody in the adoptive world, how you can still help and support those families in the future. Yeah. So first thing I would like for Alex to do is tell us a little bit about how you became an adoptive parent.
For sure. So, I've wanted to adopt for a really long time, since I was probably a teenager, and I really had a heart to adopt older kids. When I met my husband, we realized we were kind of on the same page there, and so we knew that that was going to be a part of our story. We had a bio kid. He was 8 months old, I was still pregnant with him when we started our adoption process. We decided that why not do it all at once? Anyway.
I'm giggling because I know the finality of all this, and so it just makes me laugh. Okay, sorry.
So he was 8 months old when we got our first adoptive placement, he was 14. That was a little bit older than we had intended, but it worked out that way. And so he was 14, so we had an 8-month-old and 14-year-old. A week and a half later, after our son moved in with us, I found out I was pregnant by surprise.
Woo, surprise!
Yeah, surprise. It was like enough that, so my 8-month-old and my daughter are 16 months apart. So I was already like, I'm gonna have 2 babies. Oh my gosh.
Right.
Less than 1 month apart. So then, we realized that God was not done with our story. And then 2 months after that, we found out that our son's birth mom delivered a baby and abandoned him at the hospital, and they wanted us to adopt him as well. So I was pregnant, like halfway through my pregnancy, we had a newborn who was heavily addicted to a lot of drugs, and so he was withdrawing. It took him about 4 months to withdraw. And then we had a teenager who was like, we were getting through that honeymoon phase, so he was like unraveling and showing his true colors, and then we still had a baby. So it was like a blur. I'm impressed that I remember any of it.
Yeah.
And so then my daughter was born. My 2 youngest of my adopted son and then my daughter are 5.5 months apart, so they're like our twins. And then my other son's just a year ahead. So so we have the 3 of them within 16 months, and then he is now 18. He lives on his own. Well, I say he has a roommate, but yeah.
Right. He's off to college. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's the short story.
So that is the very short story. And every time her or Brian tell that story to somebody, I get physically exhausted just thinking about it. So just a matter of just like the adoptive process and how like emotionally draining that probably is, and kind of how all that goes through, on top of birthing the 2 children, on top of, you know, all of that. So kudos to y'all for that. And that's why they're some of my favorite people in the whole world. So, okay. So we're going to move on a little bit. So one of the things that I have found just personally, I listen to your podcast as often as I possibly can. And I remember calling you, or maybe even just like messaging you one day and just saying like, you know, I am not an adoptive mom. I don't think it's in my wheelhouse to be doing that as far as how my family goes and our lives and things like that. I'm not totally discounting it at this point, but it's not something that's on our radar.
You're kind of an adoptive mom.
But listening to your podcast and understanding that I don't have to be an adoptive mom to be able to understand some of that plight and be able to get involved and things like that. And I remember like maybe I messaged you and I was like crying, and I was like, I don't know how you do this. Like it takes such a big heart, and like there's so much that comes along with that. But one of the things that was discussed on that particular episode were the common misconceptions of adoption. So if you could talk a little bit about those just for our audience, just to let them know kind of, you know, because I think a lot of people have different feelings about it and different emotions about it, but there's also some literally people just don't understand.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things that really impacts adoptive families as a whole, as well as the adopted child, is that the common misconception that the adopted child wants to be there, that they're really grateful for this experience, or that they're happy about it. That is often not the case, especially if it's through foster care, or if or international, if the child is older. But even, you know, a child adopted at birth, as they grow older and they start to realize the gravity of their story, and a lot of the time when people say things like, oh, aren't you so, you know, thankful? A lot of the time they're not. And that's a big common misconception.
Sure.
that all the parties are willing and, you know, happy to be
Sure.
there. I think that there's a big, there's a big gap there.
Yeah. I think that's important. I have a friend right now who's going through the adoption process. She's going through private adoption, and they're going to be adopting a newborn who's not here yet, you know, but the process of just listening to her and just, you know, sometimes those parents, the birth parents, are going through a lot too, and being there, especially in those early stages too, them making sure that they also have a support system is important.
Yes.
So if you know people who have, you know, given up their children for adoption, you know, I think in general, most of those people are doing that because they understand they can't give that child the life that they think they deserve. And so I think even being supportive on both sides of that is important for
Absolutely.
us as the public to do that. So then we're going to talk a little bit about, and I know you have a very nice story from last Friday, but talking about how adoptive families struggle with, you know, dental visits, even just regular medical consultations, things like that. Talk a little bit about that, and maybe use some of, I know your son Rock has had some issues and things like that have come up. You could talk just a little bit about that, and how, if anybody in our dental community or our medical community is watching, you know, how they can be a better partner for your family for that.
For sure. So one of the hardest things is that when you have something like trauma, which is a very misunderstood thing in our culture, and I say that as someone who, before I had kids who had been through trauma, I didn't understand it either. And I think that it's such a massive entity that I think it's important for any medical professional to at least have an awareness of trauma and what it does to the brain and how it makes people behave and what survival instincts can come out of that. So I think that one thing that you guys are really good at here at PDAO is you're just really great at being understanding and saying like, hey, this is not a normal child, normal, neurotypical, I'll say, that's the more PC term, but this is not a neurotypical child, so I can't treat them as such, because I think that the world as a whole really tries to put these kids, even if they look great on the outside, into a neurotypical box. And so treating it that way first, but also giving the mom a ton of grace, the mom or the dad or whoever's taking the kid, because, you know, I was here and this is a business that is very trauma informed, that they're really great about this stuff. And I was still just like mortified. My child was screaming. people were like giving us looks as they walked by, like not staff, but other people. And I was just like so embarrassed leaving, and like they still gave him a prize. I took it away as soon as we got in the car. I was like, you do not deserve this.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
No, it's fine. But just giving the mom a lot of grace and saying, hey, I know that this can't be easy for you, and I'm dealing with this for like a minute, and you get to like go home and continue to deal with it. So that's a really big thing, but also not, I would suggest consulting with the mom before you make any diagnosis, especially in front of the child. So
Sure.
Before you say like, hey, go home and do this, sometimes that's not feasible. Sometimes that's not healthy. We have had people tell us to give our child medication that he actually can't have. We've had people say, well, just try this in front of the kid. And we're like, that does not work. There are a lot of people who say things that are just inappropriate or whatever. So having some awareness and taking the time to be trauma trained, because I think that there are so many adoptive families, and a lot of medical professionals might have the tendency to think like this is such a rare case that it's not really worth my time. And I would fully disagree.
Sure.
There's a lot of people, even if they're not in the adoptive world, who could benefit from just a tiny bit of trauma training and awareness.
Well, and we totally agree with that. Obviously, here we do try to do at least once a year, we do some type of trauma training. But it's also like important to, like you said, outside of the adoptive world, just in general, I think just where our lives are taking us now, more people are coming forward about trauma they experience as children. So even going into adulthood, they're still dealing with things. And we're not talking about like the trauma where you didn't like the dentist as an adult. That's
Right.
not what we're discussing here. But, there's a lot of things that can be done in that space. I think just watching you and Brian just be advocates for Rock, especially in the, with what all he's dealt with since birth and things like that. And, and that, Rock is 4.
He just turned 4.
And, he is just now going to be dealing with some dental issues
Yeah.
that have come from, things that were with birth mom and things like that. And so those things will continue to carry on throughout their life. So I think just, if you're a medical professional out there, a dental professional out there, do your best to try to get into those trauma trainings, push for your community to talk to people like Alex, people in the adoptive world space, people in the trauma space, to make sure that we're fully and completely understanding that from their point of view as well. We always try to act like because we've been to dental school or medical school or whatever, we know everything, so I think just coming from those personal stories as well, you can learn so much, specifically even just in podcasts are an easy way to learn as well. You can learn lots of stories about adoptive families, especially on Alex's podcast, but in general, there are other podcasts out there about trauma and things like that. So,
well, and I'd love to add too, just another thing that you guys did really well was because, Rock is about to have his 3rd surgery this year, having to do, not the 3rd having to do with dental, but just his 3rd surgery, the 1st having to do with dental. And that was something that I actually just realized, wow, I did not feel any shame about that. Like
Sure.
he was not in any way assumptive that this was my fault, or that I caused this, or that I wasn't doing enough to prevent it. And that is something that we really struggle with. And I was like, wow, I didn't feel that at all. That's amazing, because that is not common.
Sure.
Usually you're made to feel like it's somehow your fault. So that was great.
Right. And, and one thing we do try to do here as a group, as a pediatric dental group here in Northwest Arkansas, is understand that not every child is the same. Not every family is the same. Not everyone comes from the same circumstances. Not everyone comes from the same financial backgrounds, anything like that. But, everyone for the most part have teeth, and like there's going to be different things that have happened, within the child's lifetime, in the parent's lifetime, that kept the oral hygiene habits from being kept up with so well, so there's different things. And so from our point of view, we don't judge. We don't, I know Rock had some problems with even just getting x-rays. And I actually spoke to one of the assistants yesterday, and she was talking to me about it and just said, it was one of those things where we were willing to kind of step aside and say, okay, the x-rays aren't necessary technically, but mom was an advocate for Rock and was like, he needs to have them. He's got a lot of issues going on. I want to make sure that's going to, and we will do whatever it is that you want to do. So talk to us, tell us what your concerns are. And, we will not push the child into anything that we don't think is technically necessary, but we're also going to go along with your path of what you need as well, and be there to be an advocate for you with your child. So
for sure.
I think that's super important. So last but not least, the November is National Adoption Month. And so if you are out there and maybe you're not in the adoptive space, you don't know any adoptive parents, I would like, Alex, for you to talk a little bit about how, just as the public comes in and is watching this video, how maybe they can support other adoptive families that are in their community.
For sure. One of the biggest things that I always advocate for is actually something that's not doing something, and that's just to not leave us. And I know that that sounds really extreme, but a lot of the times we feel very, very alone because we're dealing with something really hard, and other people who are not really don't know what to do with that, and they don't want to get in the way, or they don't want to overstep, so they just back away slowly. And that's really hurtful. I think that a lot of the time what we need is for someone to just be there, even if they're not really doing anything, to just check in, to just show up, to just be there and not leave. Another thing, you know, on the practical side, something that's really helpful is meals.
Sure.
I know that that sounds cliche, but that's really, really helpful. Not just meals, but also things like groceries, or, you know, helping with just, you know, logistics like carpooling. And a lot of those times what we need is for someone to tell us that they're going to do that. Not ask us what we need, not ask us if we need that, but just say, hey, I'm doing this. I'm bringing you a meal. I'm, you know, helping you with your landscaping. I had someone do that the other day.
Nice.
I'm, you know, picking your kid up for an hour. I'm, you know, something like that. That's really, really great. Another thing that's not so tangible is to believe us, to listen and believe what we're saying. A lot of these kids, because of their trauma, because of what they're going through, they act one way to you and another way at home. And that is very difficult. So when we say things like, don't hug him, don't say this, don't do these things, we mean that. Please believe us. And I know this goes back to the first thing, but just being kind and being there and being our friend through the hard stuff is really, really important.
Yeah, I think all those are great points. I think, you know, just getting to know you and Brian a little bit better over the last year has really opened up my eyes to what I'm seeing. So are there any particular businesses you can think of, or agencies maybe in our area that people can connect with? Like maybe if they don't know anybody, I know you could connect with your church and things like that. But is there any other way for them to get connected if they want to learn more about how to adopt? I know there's the call possibly.
Yes, the call is great, and there are definitely volunteer opportunities within the call. The call exists to train foster and adoptive parents, so they do the same training that DHS does, but they condense it, and it's faith-based, and so they do those things, and then they have post-adoption or post-foster care support as well, and that is huge. And I know that they have a freezer, they have a closet, they have lots of ways that you can support adoptive families just through them. You can go drop off a meal and they stick it in the freezer, and adoptive families or foster families can just come and get one whenever they need. Clothing for closets, toiletries, that's huge. Like, I mean, something as dumb as toilet paper, like that's a big deal to just have on hand, or like Rubbermaid bins, because a lot of these kids are coming to their foster adoptive homes with their things in trash bags. And so a big push is to have Rubbermaid bins that they can take with them, or luggage. Another great organization is Shared Beginnings. So kind of going back to what you had said earlier about supporting that third often forgotten triad in the piece in the adoption triad is the birth mom, and being able to support her after the hardest decision of her life. And Shared Beginnings does just that. So it is an adoption agency, but they focus on the birth mom, and they make sure that she gets the support before and after placing her child for adoption. There are tons of volunteer opportunities. This one's close to my heart. My mom is a co-founder.
That's where she was going.
Yeah, she is awesome, and they're doing just amazing things. Even for, you know, I know some of you may have heard recently of the scandal just with some human trafficking, adoption, stuff like that. And Shared Beginnings has been really helpful just in catching some of those birth moms who were lost in the mix there.
Sure. That was heartbreaking to hear, especially in our community in Northwest Arkansas, knowing, you know, that directly affected a lot of people here. And that was super heartbreaking to hear.
For sure.
So we went over a lot today in a very short amount of time. We wanted to keep this short and sweet so that you could get the information that you needed. Feel free to ask us any questions here in the comments, and we will get back to you. I'll have Alex sign on if there's any extra questions. Excuse me, my cough is, the allergies are working it up today. Make sure we get those questions answered for you. If you need any additional information about the call or Shared Beginnings, drop us a comment and we'll get that information to you. And also make sure you subscribe to Alex's podcast. We have
Yes.
the Adoptive Mom podcast. She's done some rebranding. It looks fabulous. It's super cute. And she just does a really good job. She's actually interviewed Leanne Toohey from The Blind Side. I'm just saying.
It's true.
So she's a big deal, and Leanne's a big deal too. But we want to thank you all for watching today. Thank you, Alex, for being here. I super appreciate you taking the time out of your super busy schedule to come on and talk to us about this. We hope that we've provided some great information for you today. Again, do not ever hesitate to reach out to me directly. You can email me at amy@smilesarwild.com. Thanks again for watching.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe and go visit us on smilesarwild.com.